I was born in 1928, and as the record shows, we were starting into the middle of depression, and the stock market went fluey. 4 years later, the banks went fluey, and people lost their house, their savings, and whatnot. I came from a middle-income family. My father came from Philadelphia. My mother came from a town 40 miles away, and we lived in a rented home, a row home. Rent was about $11 a month, and that seems like, well, a quart of milk was 11. A quart of milk was 10 cents. A loaf of bread was about 11 cents. So it was a different time. A man worked for a job, $18, $20 a week was a living. It was a tough living, but it was a living. And unfortunately, we had unemployment, 27% unemployment. And my father was unemployed for about 2.5 years. Had odd jobs in between, but there was no ongoing regular employment. It was hard scrabble in many ways. But let me be clear. We didn't have the worst of it. The people who had the worst of it were lesser than us, and the people who had the lesser of that were worse than them. The times were tougher. My mother, we bought bakery goods in the day-old store. Bakery bread didn't have all the preservatives in then that it has today. So the loaf of bread was wrapped in wax paper, and it would have lines on the bottom. And so if that bread came into the store on a Monday, it had one line. If it came in on a Tuesday, but you couldn't keep that in the store for the third day. It had to go to the second day, or second day old, a store, and they sold things in there. They sold milk and cheese and butter and bread and rolls and whatnot. And so if you got desserts, if there was a dessert, you got it occasionally. You didn't get it on a regular basis. Thing like children think they get a case of soda today, or they get a big bottle of soda. Soda was a big experience. You get a soda cost a nickel. I lived in a world where you would go to your parents and say, "Can I go to the movies this weekend?" And it was 11 cents, and my mother would say, "We can't afford that. We can't afford that." And you didn't have ice cream whenever you wanted, or a Coke whenever you wanted. But it's a great learning experience. If you can look at life as a learning experience, every piece of it, every part of it will give you an insight into what your personal growth could be. I lived in the city, went to inner city school. I have partial recall. You show me something once or twice, and I can remember it and digest it and spit it back to you. And so I skipped second grade completely. When I was in second grade, they moved me to third grade. And when I was in sixth grade, they moved me to seventh grade. I also, it's a little difficult to say some of these things. I suffer from speech malfunction. I had a speaking defect, and though I was in the Philadelphia school system, I also had to be in speech therapy in the school system for about 6 or 7 years. Has to do with the way my mouth is formed and some other factors. But not pleasant. I was a little overweight kid with what sounded like a lisp, imperfect language, and I didn't have good health habits, hygiene, I mean. So all those things, that's how I was positioned in school. Was bullied quite a bit when I was younger, and then that all changed when I was about 14 or so, and I grew mature and muscular and had control of my speech, and so it changed a little bit. But I was pretty industrious. I always had money from doing things. When I say money, I worked hard. I ran a window washing business, and I went to school, so I would do the window washing usually on a Saturday and Sunday. And I finally got to where I had a crew. I had 2 sets of ladders. We worked one side of the street, they worked the other. But I owned the ladders, and I got the customers, and I collected the money. Now, if I had a real good day, I could make $6 or $8. Between the 2 days, I would make $12, $13. And a grown man was making $25, $30 a week. And so I did pretty well. I did a lot of other things. And the newspaper, there would be a headline, Germany invades Czechoslovakia, Germany invades the... So if you went to the movies, they had something called movie tone news, and it would show you those things. This was happening in Europe. The only way we knew Europe because it was on a map. It was also happening in Manchuria and China, in those areas. They used to sell bubble gum in a flat form, bubble gum, and it had a bubble gum card in there, and they were called the horrors of war. Those cards came with every time you bought bubble gum, you'd get one, and you could see these things, and there were pictures on there, and like the Japanese invading Manchuria or the rape of Nanking, and you saw those pictures. They were called horrors of war, but you didn't identify them with premise. That was all something that was happening in another part of the world. Now, when it came down to what was going to actually happen to us, I mean, yes, you did hear about England getting bombed and the Germans invading the Sudetenland or the other countries, and sometimes you heard about the Japanese. And all this led up to, remember, in 1941, Japanese took an action which caused us to be involved with war with them. 3 or 4 days later, Hitler declared war on us. But that was all remote. That was in another part of the world. But when we heard on December 7th, that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor, nobody even knew where Pearl Harbor was. We didn't. And Hawaii was not a state at the time. And after all, it's, 3 or 4,000 miles off the coast of California. So when you take a look at that, that was all stuff that was happening some other place. We were a different country than we are now, different values, different things of importance. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and we didn't know the cause of it. It was because we were embargoing them and preventing them to do certain things in certain areas, and consequently, they built up a routine of attacking all these smaller islands off the coast of Japan. So we knew little about that. But when that struck, December 7th, there were only 130 million people in the United States. Now, we put 16 plus million in uniform. That's 12.5% of our population. Never been done before. And so there was a sense of maturation in society, and people wanted to, not everyone, but we were a country that had to decide how we would defend ourselves. And because of that, you couldn't get, they had a peacetime draft, 1939, first peacetime draft, but you had to be over 18. You wouldn't have been put in the draft pool. Some of those people were employed or whatnot. When you get out of school, or you had to quit school early, you had to get a job in those days. So those people were all working someplace or trying to get work someplace when this thing occurred. And there was a sense of patriotism that doesn't exist today, and I don't know will ever come again. But the day after Pearl Harbor, the recruiting stations for the Army, the Navy, Coast, they were low. They had lines around the block for people waiting to get in. A lot of people didn't want to go in the Army, so they went in the Navy. So it was the patriotic thing to do. And there's a politic that surrounds war. But the thing that drives the politic is the available of men and arms. Now, I never even thought about this until the war was over. We were an American country isolated from the rest of the world. Yet we put together an Army, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, Merchant Marines. We fought on five continents. But everything to every war was shipped from here to another place. So if you felt like you wanted to participate, and they used to have a little banner that would hang in the window. My parent would put it in the window. And then if you had a star in there, that was a star of you having one of your children in the service. If you had two of them in, you get 2 stars. And if you went missing, it went to a silver star. And if you died, then your gold star would be in there. So people put those in their windows, and the American flag became important. And going to school and saying patriotic things and singing the Star Spangled Banner and saluting the flag and doing the things that our predecessors had fought for, the freedoms of this country, were important. Now, you couldn't drive a car until you were 18 years of age where I lived. And so when I went away at 15, I couldn't drive a car. In fact, you couldn't buy a drink until you were 21 years of age. You couldn't vote till you were 21 years of age. But if you went in the service, you were doing a man's thing, and you're doing something that was supposed to be supportive of our country. And the women contributed. That's why they call it the greatest generation, because the women also. We took all of our manpower away, and they did the things that men had the jobs to do. Drove trolley cars, buses, and worked in the factories and built the planes, the armament, and whatnot. So it was a congealing thing. It brought us together. This country was rising out of a very bad depression, and so things changed dramatically. People, when you walked down the street in a uniform, people respected you and respected what you were doing. Slowly, the older boys in the neighborhood went away, and then these guys who were my friends were going away, and I wanted to be a part of it. I was in a culture where I did what they did, even though they were a couple of years older. And I first went and enlisted in the Navy. I say, why the Navy? Well, because I didn't want to go in the Army. Why didn't you want to go in the Army? Well, the Navy had better uniforms and the girls liked it, right? So I was going to go do that military thing, and I would be a swashbuckler. Unfortunately, what happened, I forged the birth certificate, didn't do it too well the first time, and the police showed up at my parents' home and told them that I'd been a truant, I wasn't going to school, and that I had volunteered to go into the Navy. And when I got home, my parents didn't take this too kindly. And they asked me, I said, yeah, that's true. That's what I'm going to do. And of course, they said no, and they said no. But what happened is that the Navy rejected my application because it was a bad forgery. So then I only learned about the U.S. Maritime Service, which had a uniform that looked like the Navy. And the U.S. Maritime Service was put together in 1938. And I applied there, but I had a better birth certificate. Yeah, I had a friend who showed me how to do it, and it worked better the second time. Now keep in mind, I was 15. And if the listener, you think of a 15-year-old, if you have children, a 15-year-old, that they were going to go to war, I said, well, you must have been very mature. No, we're not more mature than they were, but we thought we were. You leave your home, you meet everybody at a train station, you go in a group, there's a guy assigned to the group, and the train left from Philadelphia and went to New York. We got off in New York, and they put us on a bus, and they drive us out to a place called Sheep's Head Bay. And it was a military base, a gated wire, and you couldn't get in and get out without pass, and everybody had on a uniform. And did away with your civilian clothes, and you wore the military uniforms. You wore jeans, which were really dungarees, and blue shirts, and a white sailor's cap, and you were in training. But when people ask me, so what kind of transition? I say, that's transition. One day you do what you want. The next day somebody tells you when to get up, when to lay down, when to eat, what to eat, and what you'll do on a given day, and when you'll go to bed, when you'll keep your mouth shut. And somebody's telling you to do that. And all of a sudden, you realize, you can't get up in the morning. Mommy, I don't feel good. I don't think I can go to school today. You don't do that anymore because it won't get you anywhere. In the training base was also complicated. Getting along with you sleep in the same room, you shower in the same room, and all that kind of stuff. And it's tough. And there's a hierarchy system in there. Some people think they're tougher than others. And so the bullying may start. And I didn't get along with people bullying me, so I got in a lot of trouble in there as well. I got in, my behavior didn't change immediately. I got in real trouble real quickly and was court-martialed. We got in a fight on the docks. They were teaching us something. They got in a fight in the docks, and what happened, instead of making us stop, the guy in charge, I don't know what his title was, but he made the other guys form a ring and put the two of us in the rings. Now, we had on pea coats, which is like a short overcoat, and we had on a your vest. You had a life-saving vest, and on a wool cap, and you had on gloves. So figure, how much trouble can you get into? So the guy, he hit first. It's always better to hit last. But anyhow, we got in a fracas, and they did it there, and I hurt the other guy badly, and they had to take him to the hospital, and then I got arrested. Now, the guy who provoked it is the guy that got hurt. The guy that permitted it was a junior officer or a petty officer or whatever it was, and he let it happen. It's called Captain's Mass, and they put me through it, and it was a guy in a braided uniform, and he looked at everything, and he said to me, Yoho, that's your name? Yes, sir. Where are you from? Philadelphia, sir. Oh, tough city kid. No, sir. I said, yeah. You did things that you're not supposed to do to people. So I didn't hit first. He said, don't tell me that again. So anyhow, then they sit and listen to all the evidence. They're going to come back. Fortunate. That officer was the head of the boxing squad. And they put me on the boxing squad. Thank you, Jesus. And it worked out very well for me. I was a pretty good boxer, and it didn't work out for me. I don't know what would happen if that didn't happen. So we got home on leave before we were eventually sent on a ship. The book that they used for recruiting for that I was on the cover. And people say, how come you got on the cover? I was so good looking. Well, I don't know how I got on the cover. I happened to be in a group there, and I never saw it until years and years later when they reproduced the book, and then I got to see it. Becoming an adult in such immediacy, not good. And but it did. And then you get assigned to a ship. Now, I'd never been on a ship. The only ocean I ever saw was one time my family got to Atlantic City. I don't remember how we got there, and you saw the ocean. That's the ocean, huh? But that's the closest we ever got to the ocean. But now you're on a ship, and you stay in watches, 4 on, 8 off. So you're on watch all the time, 7 days a week. I was a fireman water tender down in the engine room. The engine room on a ship, I was on a tanker. I was put on a T2 tanker that holds oil and to refuel other ships. If you're in the engine room, you're below the water line. Here's the ship. Here's the bottom of the ship. So from here down is water. You're in water. So you're in the engine room, and I tend the boilers. When they went into gunnery practice, the first time, there's the big guns on the ship. They say we were merchant ships, and the merchant ship was supposed to be a civilian ship, but it wasn't. We had an armed guard crew. They were U.S. Navy, and they were on our ship as well. I think there were about 26 or 28 of them. And they have these guns. On the front of the ship is something called a 3-inch 50. That's a gun, sticks out in the air. The back of the ship is a 5-inch 38. And then there are 8 machine guns. And on the ship, there's a big thing up. It looks like a big funnel up in the air. They're called to suck in air because there's no air down there. There's no air conditioning, and it's pretty hot down there. And so the air comes in there and goes down into the engine room. But what happened when we went through the Panama Canal and they did gunnery practice, that noise from up on the deck hit these cows, and when it came down to the engine room, it sounded like World War III, World War II, World War I were all being fought down there. It was noisy. So it got my first realization. I was on watch, and then I asked an older guy, he's probably 23. He was an officer. And I said, sir, what that noise, the guns going off, it just made me think, if we take a hit, how do we get out of here? Because keep in mind what I'm telling you, 5 stairs. And he says, kid, his words to me, kid, if you take a hit, you don't get out of here. That's the first time I realized you could get killed or you could die. I never realized it. Never even thought about it. Never even thought that I was going to be sent someplace where I could be taken out and the ship could be sunk and you go down with the ship. Never even entered my mind. Great realization. And by then I'm 16 and he's an older guy. He's 22 or 23. We send people to war, even the ones that are 17, 18, and 19 that do not have a mature realization that you'll go one way, you may never come back. And so I don't care what training they give you, the realization only happens when you get into a combat area, or if you see the movie Saving Private Ryan and you see the opening of the D-Day invasion and you see those ships and the gunfire and the blood and the water and whatnot, and the first wave of those guys going ashore, the first wave, they got about a 90+% casualty rate of those guys. They don't make it. They don't cut it. And so if you look at the service I was in there, we lost more men than any other. 1 out of 26 of us died. They only recruited 250,000 of them. There are less than 1,200 alive today. And the number, 1 out of 26 died. And a horrible thing, because they're the ones that died, and you don't even talk about the ones that came home mentally and physically not prepared to face life, because that also happens. So, but you don't have that realization. There's an idealization. You get up and you look in the mirror, you got a good head of hair, and you look great, and you got a swagger, and when the ship pulls in, there's always somewhere you're going to go with a lot of girls, and they're going to, oh, you're here. So that happens in far. But that isn't the way it is most of the time. So then there is a reality there. There's also an arrogance about youth. You don't think, after you do something, somebody says, that's stupid. Why'd you do that? That's stupid. Well, I didn't know. And you can't say you didn't know. Why did you do that? So I wanted to be away. I wanted to serve my country. But the guy said, why in God's name would you go into the engine room? Because when a ship is hit, you're going to be the first fatalities. No matter where it's hit, you're going to go down with that ship. Now, if you say that and you talk to people about it, it's one thing. The realization. Do you know in the Navy, one of the things we had in World War II, we had a great influence of the submarine. The submarine downed our ships and we downed other ships in our submarine. Now, if you go on a submarine, the minute you get inside of a submarine, you'll feel the claustrophobia. The claustrophobia sets in because here's this vehicle. Looks like pretty. Here are the torpedoes. They're the ones that are going to shoot eventually. They have a cot over them and between them. You sleep between there. And so anytime you get involved, let's say in a ship or in a piece of armament or an aircraft, you isolate yourself from the rest of the world, and your potential to be injured or killed is way up here. High potential. high expectation, high potential. And so if you make it and you don't do those things, then you feel happy, lucky. And I like to feel that at my age that I can do what I do, look like I do, and get all the advantages I do. I speak all over the world. I'm really speaking for the other guys who did the same dumb things I did, and some pay the ultimate price and aren't going to be here anymore. And I speak for them. And I speak through my own experience as well. When you get on a ship, you see the glamour life that you're leaving of the people admiring your uniform or whatever. So when we get on this ship and you get assigned to quarters, you're already with people that you don't know. You're going to bathe and shower in the same place with them. You dress and undress in tight quarters. And you're going to sleep near other people who do everything but not take a bath, and they have body odors, or they break wind through the night, or whatever it is. We smoked. Everybody smoked. If you didn't smoke, you inhaled what the other guy smoked. That life is not a decent lifestyle. You pay a price for it later. There's a sense of bravado about being there. So now this ship that I'm on takes its first trip. We went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was called a shakedown. I was on a tanker. It was a new model tanker. It was called a T2. T stands for turbine. It was a turbine. Instead of a steam engine, it was a turbine. And I was on the T2 tanker. And they have to put different kinds of armament on them. They put a thing called degaussing. They have degaussing wires in the outside perimeter of the ship. And they're so that you don't attract mines, the mines that are in the water. The enemy puts them in the water. And then you picked up your crew, and the armed crew, the armed guard crew. And they stay in a separate part of the ship. We're Navy, they're Merchant Marine. For the most part, I don't know. We tolerated each other, never met much more than that. So we go to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And from Halifax, Nova Scotia, where we get cleared, we come back to the same port. And we leave from that port for our first mission. We load water into those tanks for ballast. And we go to Carapita, Venezuela. So look on the map. Philadelphia, Carapita, Venezuela. And when you get there, it's not a thriving business community or anything like that. You're in the jungle. That's where the refineries are. And we take on crude oil. Now that means that the crude oil is like molasses. It's very thick. It's got to be refined. It's almost like tar. We leave Carapita, Venezuela, and we go to the Netherlands, West Indies. And in Curacao, we drop that kind of crude oil, and we picked up refined oil. And the kind of oil we picked up was called bunker C, which is fueling for other ships. Now we leave there, and we go down and go through the Panama Canal. Now you're going through the Panama Canal, it takes a better day to go through. It's a great thing to go today as a tourist, but in those days, you sit around and wonder where we're going, how we're going to get there. So we get to the other side of Panama, the Pacific side, and we're in port there, and then they start to take on stores. There's a Navy base there, and they take on the stores that we're going to need. I had no idea where we're going. We're going to a rendezvous spot, and the first rendezvous spot, I think, was Ulithi. But it takes from Panama to Ulithi, it takes like 20, 21 days, and you're out in open water without any Guardian combat ships or anything of that nature, which is supposed to be how they protect the ship. We didn't have them. We went out there, and there's tedium, every day. If you're, let's say you're on watch in the morning, and you go from 8 to 12. So you have to be down there 5 minutes before 8 to get a turnover from the guy that's in your position that's going off watch. So now you get in there, and if you're in there at 8 o'clock, you stay on your watch until 12 noon. In the meantime, you have to clean certain parts of the equipment and whatnot, make sure the water level's maintained, clean the burners, and put new tips on them and whatnot. And then at noon, you come up, you wash up, and you get mess hall. Then when you're through there, you're through for the day until 8 o'clock at night. Then you go back on duty. And you never really get 8 full hours of staying away from. It's not good for your system in your youth. You really need more sleep than you do when you're in your mid-20s, 30s, or 40s. So then you stood on watch, and then that's the way you did it. And in the meantime, when you get into combat areas, once we go through the canal, it's a long trip. And anywhere along the line, you could get attacked by the enemy. Now, it's an interesting thing. When at the end of the war, we were part of the thing that was servicing for the invasion of Okinawa. Now, when you see a plane, this is an interesting thing. When you see that plane may be 50 miles away from you. You see them in the air, and they look like a pigeon up there. So if you got GQ, you immediately went to your quarters. We never got sunk. I was never on a ship that got sunk. I was never on a ship that was under full attack. But we were always in the combat zone where it could happen, and fortunately, it didn't happen to me, no. We had been out there a long time. You take this oil out there and you refuel other ships, and then you go back and you'll pick up more. There were tankers that would come in to Saipan, and they were big concrete barges. They would drop their oil, and we'd come and take that oil out and come and feed it to other ships. So when the war ended, the radio man and the chief officer, the gunnery officer, and the captain bring us, all that aren't on duty at the time, into the mess hall, the mess room. And they tell us the war's over. And then they told us this story about testing this bomb at Los Alamos and how it blew a hole in the ground a mile wide. Baloney, there's no bomb that can do that. No, that couldn't be. Then they say they bombed these 2 cities in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We didn't believe any of that. But they said the war is over, so let's take it to the war. Let's take us home. It didn't work that way. We didn't get to go home. But so by the time we heard it, it was all done. The celebrations for all that were different. We didn't celebrate that day. When the war ended, August 15th, 1945, 4 days later, I turned 17. So, and we didn't get to come home right away either. The president, Harry Truman, then asked us to stay in because then we had to bring goods and people and whatnot home from other ports. So we didn't get to go right home. When that war ended, we went all the way back to 20-some days to go back through the canal. We go through the canal. We dropped off our military guys, the gunners. They all got left off there in Panama because they had bases there and they would be transported elsewhere. But we were sent to England with the load of oil we had. And then I stayed in because I trained and I got to be a junior officer, and I had a nice assignment on ships that were just developed after. They were called victory ships. And I was on those for not too much, maybe 7, 8 months or so. An anticipation. I'm going to go home. Everybody will like me and love me and welcome me as a returning hero. Doesn't work that way. I came home, my ship was sent to Mobile, Alabama. They put the ships that they weren't going to be used anymore into something called mothballs. And they really spun a web around them so that they were sealed, and they would rehab those ships and sell them to another country. So when we left that ship, I took a train from Mobile, Alabama. I took a train that went to Washington, D.C., and changed trains that took me then to Philadelphia. Now, when I get at the train station, I get home, I take my gear and I get on ground transportation. I finally end up getting off a trolley car that's up the street from my house. And you'd have to live in the inner city to know what I'm going to talk. It was trash day. So people in row homes put their trash out and look like metal baskets, metal containers. It's the ashes from the fire, too, that are put in there. And so I come home, and there I am, and everybody's already working and doing their other things. They're getting, and that was it. And I came home to the realities of coming home to a country where there was, right then, there was a recession. All these guys getting back who wanted jobs, and the women had to leave the jobs and give it back to the men. But some of them, if they went away at 17, had never had a job. And there was no job for them when they got home. And don't forget, we put all these men in uniform. Now we come home, and our industry was making things for warfare, and the factories were empty and whatnot. So, in short, I had to go back to school. I had to go to night school. I didn't have a high school education, and my family couldn't afford to keep me at home without working. So I was really concerned about it because I'd have to go back to high school. Then I found out there was something called a GED, General Equivalency Diploma. I took that, I got a high school diploma, and I went to night school. And then I went to night school for my college education. So when I was going to school at night, I worked during the day for contractors. It's laborious work, but it was a high-paying job compared to other jobs. I mean, if you could make $1 an hour, that was big time. You make that kind of money. And the laborer was getting 80 cents an hour or something. So then if you got a job where you could make $60, $70, $80 a week, big time. And I could do that in the construction trades. The drawback is that when you go to school at night, you got to be careful. You're really pretty tired by then. And the strange phenomena is when during the day you're outside working around, it's cold and what have you. The minute you get into heat, you get drowsy. So I went to school at night, and I had to get permission to stand beside my desk because if I sat down, I fell asleep. But I did get to school, and I accomplished all those things. Everybody didn't, you can say everybody had the same opportunity. It's not the same. I told you I have partial recall, so going to school at night was really an easy pop for me. I hear it once, I see it once, I have to read a book, I read a chapter, I have good retention. And so because of that, I did fairly well with that. Now the reality comes, I don't want to do that the rest of my life. So now I graduate. Now I've got a college degree. Right? I'm a big man. I'm a veteran with a college degree. Could not get a job. Now, the first job that was offered to me that had any real sense was a job in selling. And they had me take a series of tests and told me, you're going to be a great salesman. But in the beginning, I went for a number of the jobs they told me that, and I didn't get a job offer. So I got a job offer from a company that eventually became a division of Reynolds Metal. And it was they were getting into building materials. And I got a job with that company. I became a salesperson, worked for a number of years, became a trainer, become an assistant branch manager, a branch manager, a division manager, and I became the assistant to the vice president of sales, and I was still 26 or 27 years old. So then I went and formed my own business. Everything through life is a learning experience. Anything that we want is available to us today. Now, if you're a veteran and you're listening to this, a veteran's family, just know there's some stuff we carried with us, some baggage they carried with us. And people come up to me all the time today because I've spoken all over the world, spoken in every state in the United States and 22 foreign countries, and they'll say to me, my grandfather was in that war, but he never wanted to talk about it. My uncle's father was in that war, and he says, yeah, but he doesn't want to talk about that. But when he gets with veterans groups, they'll talk because there's a hurt. There is a sad part of being a veteran. The Brits had a great poet who wrote a poem about it. It was called Tommy, Tommie, Tommy, which is the British soldier. And it was Tommy this, Tommy that. Now, Tommy, go away. Meaning, we need you for war, we need you for peace, but at a time we don't need you, go away. So if you reflect on it, we had an experience that will probably, hopefully, never be repeated. The number of men, don't forget, I'm saying 12.5% of our population. Kids, guy flew a bomber. He's got a crew of 9. The captain is 22 years old or 23 years old. When World War II ended, we had lost 440,000 men, died. How many others were critically injured, we know. But there also were 1 million men in hospital beds with an undiagnosed disease. And that disease there is a disease which is identified as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, no one wants the 4th word in there because it will inhibit you from... There were 1 million men in beds, and then millions more have this same thing, and nobody knows about it. So we came home. Veterans came home after World War II. Highest rate of alcoholism that ever existed in this country. Highest rate of divorces. Highest rate of spousal abuses. Highest rate of suicides, and which even exists today. Because some of those diseases don't go away. And if you can't find a way to deal with them, then they put you in a center someplace and they treat you for depression or what have you. But it's pretty painful. And one of the things that gets me involved with the veterans movement is to tell the story of how it actually was. Not what you're told it is, but what it actually was. And they still, every day of the week, over 20 veterans take their lives every day of the week. Now, there are over 130 of us die every day simply because of the age factor. Now, I'm at almost 96, I'm a youth to them because the average guy is closer to 100, some are over 100. So, they are the vagaries of wars. They're the unkindness of wars. And you get two choices. You can sit on your bottom and cry about what you didn't get or how unfair it was, or go do something about it. I have no complaints. I've done very well. You see the decorations I have around my office. I've done very well in this material world. But I weep for those who did not have that good fortune. I weep for those who are today in hospitals or died in hospitals or died alone or in veteran centers where they never get to see people. My heart goes out to them. And I can't understand it at their level, but I understand the origin at the same level. The guys that are really the heroes are the guys that are under those crosses in the cemetery. The guys that are heroes that spent the rest of their life in hospitals are the guys today that are in wheelchairs, and I'm not. And there are a lot of great heroes out there. And I will stand among them and shake their hands and be their spokesman. But some of them gave, they gave up a great part of their life that no one will ever understand. And if people weren't there and if you've never been involved in it, there is no way to estimate what it was really like. There's no way to know. So there's a good, a bad, and an ugly. And it gave us a rare opportunity to do something that may never, ever be done again. This country has deteriorated in terms of patriotism. The values that we were taught to fight for, to give up our youth for, are dissipating and have been dissipated. not by consciousness, but by unconsciousness. They have no idea. When I met with people, when I came home and went to night school, I was in school with people my same age and had no idea of the experiences that I have had or had, and yet we are the same age. Well, I don't have a contemporary in that. And I have friends who were in the service and never left the confines of the United States. And if you think about it, I mean, when we have a wartime experience and there's great exhilaration and the marching and the martial music and the waving of the flags, and then you come home and you hear when our veterans came home from Vietnam, they were treated like garbage. When the soldier came home from Korea, he was told it wasn't a war. It was a police action. Now tell it to a guy who's shell-shocked. Tell it to a guy who's wounded. Tell him it was a guy who's lost an appendix, an arm. You tell it to him. You'll never understand this. And he'll nod his head. The real estate business, as you know it today, conventional real estate, where people own a home, really had its great impetus after World War II when we got the GI Bill. And they built large communities like Levittown. You've heard of that. Big communities. They buy these houses, and people could have a house, a $10,000 house with a $25 deposit. They could do it. The GI Bill. And it had some drawbacks to it, but it gave us a whole new industry. And that this country has more independent people who own their own homes than any other country in the world. Per capita, we have more people in this country that own more than one home. They own here, and they got a condo there, and everybody has a car. Some have 2 cars. We have 5 television sets in the house, 5 bathrooms. We had 1 bathroom in the house I grew up. All these things came out of a tragedy of war. But we don't learn as a society. It's a tough learning experience. And so I see that as my role today. That's what I'm supposed to do. You have to value this country. You have to value who you are. You don't have to devalue yourself for anyone. When I hear about class distinctions or what have, I say, listen, you have no idea what it is growing up in an inner city where all the different nationalities and races have to blend. You got to blend. You don't have a choice. There was nothing else. And it teaches us something. They're great people in all these other vagaries of life. And then to know it and never stop your education. Never, never, never give it up. And never give up giving to people. And I believe I was led to Christianity by my wife, who taught me what it was to be a Christian and have Christian devotion and have an understanding there's a power higher than mine, and that I was put here for a purpose, and I'm going to fulfill that purpose. I was there the day the World War II Memorial opened, and I went reluctantly. And my wife said, "Why don't we go?" And I say, "Because I don't like that kind of thing." She said, "Let us go." And my wife, Carol, said, "Give them a chance." So we went there. And we observed all the things that were going on. And then I observed that the people I really wanted to know and meet were people that I didn't know. He had on a uniform, and we could talk and say, "Yeah, we're World War II. We're World War II." I often go there when we have out-of-town visitors, and I walk them around the memorial. And I explain to them from the way you enter the memorial, those bronze bas-reliefs that are on the side, what they are, what they mean, and what they mean to people like me. And it shows every vagary of that kind of life. And when I stand in front of the wall where I see all those stars on that wall, and I watch other people, I say, "You know what that star represents?" No. So I take out the folder and a little brochure and I show them. Every one of those stars connotes a group of people, every one. Now I want you to do some multiplication and say that every guy who dies immediately affects the life of 5 to 9 other people in his family, and maybe 25 or 30 more people he interacted with. And he is taken away from us and taken away from those multitude of people. So when people listen to this, I'd like you to end it with this statement. When you're with others, tell them about us. And tell them what you saw, tell them what you heard, and then say, we gave up our yesterdays for their and your tomorrows.